ever done really a talk like this about the way we've been working, partly because we've only started working like this recently in the last year or so. Obviously there haven't been many exhibits or anything for the COVID either, but it's also really the first opportunity where we've really been able to step back and look at how we've been working and how that works and what other people can take from that. So the idea of this presentation, or as much as possible, is to try and give anyone who's vaguely interested in working in more of a farm-to-table style, as you find in kind of fine dining, in the bar world, some of the challenges we had along the way, some of the solutions, some of the things we're still finding solutions for, and ultimately what that means for us as a business and our guests. Cool. So just at the top, when we're talking about farm-to-table, the idea is working directly with farms in a way that we hadn't really found that many bars around the world were working in this way. No problem.
Hi.
Welcome. The idea is working directly with producers. When we say directly, it's not just buying from them, but it's also working with them in the long term. So making agreements to work with them in a collaborative way that goes beyond the kind of transactional nature of purchasing anything. The first part of that was quite difficult for a variety of reasons. First and foremost, obviously farmers and producers live in a completely different world to us. They have a very different day-to-day, they have a very different way of life traditionally, and they're very far away from cities, generally, by their nature. So when we started wanting to work with farms, it took a long time to convince a lot of farms that that was possible, because they never worked with a bar. It was all well and good saying we want to buy French beets, or we want to buy the best buckwheat we can find, but actually getting those people to be able to do it was quite a challenge, logistically and also just culturally. They didn't understand. They obviously are quite proud of their produce, as most farmers are, and they wanted to know that we were going to be kind of adhering to that and respecting that, and ultimately delivering something that they were happy for someone to see their name associated to. Especially in a country like France, where a large part of agriculture is protected regionally. There's AOPs and AOCs on many, many different products. For example, I have 3 things in front of you guys to taste. There's no real clear part within the talk where they come in. It was just more of an example of the things we created. But a really good example of that kind of protection is the drink on the glass on your left, I believe, is what we call creme de la creme. It's a cream liqueur, so it's a liqueur that tastes like cream. It's made with creme de Isigny, which every French person is saying I say wrong, but Isigny, like Disney-ish. That's the only protected AOP of milk in France. Obviously there's many, many cheeses and etc., but the only one of milk and cream is from Désigny. And when we wanted to use that, the rules and regulations around what we could do and how we do it and what we represented as a brand was super tight, because they protect it in the same way Cognac, Calvados, Champagne, all of these guys protect what that word means. But it went beyond that. They really wanted to have us represent to communicate what they were passionate about and what they felt made their produce their produce. So it wasn't so simple with just buying French things. It went quite beyond that, and it was in no small part our owner Tim had to just keep ringing people up over and over and over again and keep telling them the concept, the idea, what we wanted to do with their produce, and half the time it never really clicked for them until we turned up. So we actually visited every single producer we work with to spend time with them, to get to know the terroir, the people, the way of life. So when we're talking to our guests about this, we can actually explain it and also convince them that we really cared. I mean, for example, the citrus producer we work with, he's down in the Pyrenees, in the southwest of France, and he basically said, cool, if you want to do it, come see me. If not, don't worry about it. And he was so surprised when 3 very, very tired bartenders turned up at 12 o'clock in the afternoon in the Pyrenees and jumped on a train and come all the way down to see him. So it was a quite literal journey for a lot of it. We had to travel around the country to do a lot of this. But once we got past that and we started developing these relationships, from it, we wandered into a world we never really thought we would, and we had so many opportunities that we never really expected. And all of this came from that. all came from, well, why don't we do it? And no small part because of COVID and having an insane amount of time on our hands, we kept going and going and going. So it fundamentally changed every part of our business, from how we staff, the makeup of our team. The actual space that we think of as Little Red Door is now vastly different in a variety of different ways. And ultimately our guest experience, while it hasn't fundamentally changed because obviously they're still getting cocktails, everything behind that and then how we present that to our guests has changed quite a lot. And it's all centered on Grounded, which is our latest menu. But the idea is that whereas before we were changing our menus every year and it was quite a large conceptual change, going forward, whether this concept is at the front of that or not, this approach will be behind everything we do. The idea is this menu is kind of a platform to explain it, and then whether we next year do another menu specifically centered on French produce and French products or not, this approach will be behind everything, and it basically defines how we see ourselves as a business now. The menu, the kind of mechanism, the way we explain it to guests is each producer we work with and we get a product from them. Now that's a really simplified way of speaking about it, because we get many, many different things from many different producers, some of which are on the menu, some of which aren't, some of which we have various ingredients we make with produce from one producer, but each one is centered on one producer. The drinks are named after a produce, and we convert that into a product. The idea was to kind of convert this wide-spanning approach into quite a simple mechanism for our guests to understand. So we said, this is Anne-Sophie, she makes tomatoes, and this is our tomato eau de vie that we make from her tomatoes. To make quite a clear line for our guests, because ultimately we wanted to be able to find a way of explaining this in a bar, a very busy bar, in a very brief amount of time, and unfortunately not every single guest will have 45 minutes to explain the whole thing to. It was really important for us because we didn't want to do all of this and have our guests not miss the point, but almost not have the opportunity to engage with it. And we've been super surprised and really happy with how much guests have identified with this. It's something I think a lot of consumers in cocktail bars, the people who go to cocktail bars, at least in Paris, are the kind of people who are also going to fine dining restaurants. They follow, they watch Chef's Table, they are aware of this idea and this approach, they've just never really had it presented to them in a drink. And so when we started this conversation, it's probably the first menu where we've had guests literally just go, I can't decide, just give me 6 of any of these. You know, they're so won over by the idea, and the simplicity of the fact it's one product has resonated really, really well, and it's given us the confidence that if we continue down this path and developing this way of working, guests are going to increasingly engage with that because it's quite familiar. And one of the things that we've often had in our conceptual menus is a problem is that guests either completely engage and fall in love, or they don't quite get it and they just go, okay, I'll just have whatever that, they say the drink they want and you match it. And this menu is the first time where we've really lost that kind of friction between what we want to do and what the guest expects. And we think it comes from the simplicity of it. So, just to give you an idea for anybody who hasn't been to Little Red Door, we've been open for 9 years. 7 of those years we've been in the world's 50 best bars. We're busy every single day from the moment we open until the moment we close. Between 9 and 12 most days there is a 20-minute to an hour queue depending on how lucky you are. We seat about 60 people if we push it, and guests come to us expecting our conceptual menus. It's one of the things that has made this transition super easy, is we have a precedent of years and years and years of people knowing us as one of the best bars in the world, one of the best bars in Paris, and so people come to us expecting to see something they don't necessarily see before, they don't come in necessarily, no one's there because it's just a bar, basically. No one's there just to be in a bar, they come to Little Red Door, and that has done a lot of the work for us. I understand this kind of approach, if people are coming to you in a more casual kind of foot traffic way, may be a little bit harder to explain, but we found with that platform, it's given us the opportunity to do some really cool stuff. So, to simplify it down to like an elevator pitch, it's like seasonal vertical integration. what that really means is we work with producers through the year, we buy in season, we preserve, and we produce most of the products ourselves. Our long-term ambition is probably to make 80% of the liquid volume that we sell that our guests drink ourselves. We source our neutral grain alcohol, that is the base of a lot of that, from France. The long-term ambition is not only to have French grain spirit, but to be able to have organic, or bio, depending on where you are, organic French grain spirit that we can point to the field and tell you where it came from, in the same way that we can with each individual product that we use. The idea is that we are trying to find a way to give our guests complete transparency over what they're drinking and how they're drinking it, and as ourselves as a business, be able to count where every single cent of every euro we spend as a business is actually going to, and making sure that that's supporting things that I value or identify as important, so that whether that's ecologically, ethically, politically, we want to make sure they align with us. It's something we found in the start of COVID, with the brands we worked with. A lot of the brands that we worked with regularly, we found that during COVID they disappeared, and their experience of COVID and the challenges that everyone went through with that were very, very different from us. And we found ourselves, with the next project we wanted to do, being able to support the people who we identified more with, the people who we could sympathise and empathise with a lot more, and that ended up changing the brands we work with and how we work with them as well. And the business side of how this actually works is it is cheaper to make it ourselves if you make on scale. If you work with economies of scale and you work directly with producers, even if you're working with some of the most expensive citrus in Europe, if you're using high quality ingredients, you can generally make high quality products that stand up within drinks. So the citrus we work with, he works with us and Michelin star restaurants only. And his citrus is unique. The drink you have on the right hand side is a citrus bitter we make with a variety of his different citrus, but the focal point of it is a thing called pomelo, which is a pomelo variety that he grew, and it is completely unique to him because he made it accidentally, and it takes a long time to accidentally make a citrus, it takes like 12 years. But because of that, we know that that experience for our guests is completely unique to us, but it also costs us about the same as most house pour spirits. So we can create premium ingredients, but at the same cost as our house pour spirits, which generally has meant that our menu has gone from about 80% margin roughly across the menu to about 85%. And it would be easy at that point to just go, cool, we'll just take that money, but actually what we looked at is how do we keep investing that and changing the model completely. So we take the additional profit we make across our menu. I think it says on the next slide, it says somewhere. About 95% of the things we sell are cocktails, 90% of those are on the menu. So a 5% increase in margin on our cocktails on the menu is massive for us, it's huge. And that's allowed us to take that revenue and invest it into, or at least offset the costs of developing this program. So there are loads of challenges around it. I mean, making them costs money, not just the raw materials, but the time and processes and the equipment. Storing it costs money. I don't think there are any bars in the world that just have storage space for hundreds of thousands of litres lying around. And also then maintaining that space costs. So there's an offsetting to do, but there's also an investment. And when we looked at the costs and the opportunities from it, we decided that it was better for us to make that extra profit and invest it back into ourselves and develop what we see as a more satisfactory outcome than spending that money to premium brands that often do a lot of that work for bars in the meantime. So the challenges though for us from doing all of this and where we are now kind of nicely fall into guest experience of how do guests interact with that and what does that mean. Sourcing, so how do we actually find half of this stuff, what do we do to actually process it. Storage, the bane of my life, finding space for everything we paint. And then staffing, how how can we staff as a business that is fundamentally changing? We've gone from a very simple bartender model where every single bartender basically does the same thing, whether they're for the bar or on prep. There was no specialized roles, to now becoming increasingly needing specialized staffing. I mean, ultimately, I think the biggest thing we get when people ask us about it is, what do you do about daiquiris? If we're working completely seasonally, locally, blah, 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 where do you get your limes? The short answer is we don't get limes. And then people say, well, what about guests who want those things? How do you deal with that? How do people react to it? And that's why I caveat it with saying that people do come into Little Red Door with an expectation that they will taste and try new things. Also with the expectation that it's not that many guests come in and just ask for classic cocktails. And when we looked at that, it was there in the numbers. So it was a feeling that I had in my experience of moving to Paris, was that that kind of guest was very different. But when we looked over 2 years, we only had one cocktail, classic cocktail, that sold over 1,000. Relative to, for example, one menu drink across a year is anywhere up to about 15,000 drinks. It's such a small percentage of our guests asking for those classic cocktails that it was more satisfactory to make the other 95% unique and what we hope is exciting and interesting and innovative experience than focus on compromising those ideas for a very small percentage. The other thing that was really interesting is that 5,000 over 2 years, 5 times more people just asked us to create something. And so the need to have a bigger variety of exciting and interesting products that we made kind of was evident within the numbers. So when we came to actually producing all of this, we had to figure it out as we went along, because there was a lot of things we didn't know, to be honest. We didn't know how farms were going to work, how it was going to work buying it directly, what we needed to do. But people like Femme de Perche, who are one of our key partners, are a really good example of how we then learned to work like this. So when we talk about these relationships and what we're trying to do, it wasn't as straightforward as we hoped, because we hoped we'd just find all of the different things we needed from a variety of different people, and we realized that actually we needed to engage with these farms in a more comprehensive way. And so with Femme de Perche, this year has been very much us helping them. So they've told us what they had, and we've worked with that. Because they're a permaculture farm, the way that they work is they grow a vast variety of things, because that's better for biodiversity, it's better as an ecological business model. But that means they don't have lots of one thing, and they have lots and lots of little bits and pieces. And so our agreement with them is to keep taking all of these smaller bits and convert them into shelf-stable products. So that's kind of the function we have. In return for agreeing kind of in the long term that they start producing more things that we're looking for. So right now, the thing you have in the middle is our beetroot mistel. So it's a beetroot distillate and yellow beetroot juice that we wine filter. We have this because they told us that their biggest problem was going to be selling beetroots this year. Post-COVID, when you're working in a farm, you can't just put something around and the next day it's ready. You have to plan years and years and years, especially if you're permaculture. The planning that you have to do is so long-term that they're really working on like a 5-year model. And so we're now slotting into how that works. And so this year is very much kind of us convincing them that we are deserving of being in that partnership, with the idea that next year and going forward, we start serving each other a lot more. We're really trying to avoid this kind of transactional nature of, you place a fruit order, someone goes to a market, they buy from wherever, you don't really know where it comes from, it comes back in. The idea is to start developing this, and it comes from working with these people that we also have to be more innovative, because for the guest experience, the guests want to see new and interesting and different things, and that comes from working with people who work in innovative and different ways, because then we would have never thought about making a beetroot mistel if they'd never told us that that was something that they needed help with. The same with Etienne, who is our citrus grower. We would have never thought about having all of these unique and interesting varieties of citrus if we weren't working directly with him. And so because of this, we're now being driven by this. We're being driven by this diversity of ingredients that we have. And it's kind of reciprocal and kind of loops round, whereas every year they then also come to us and say, hey look, I saw this really interesting heritage carrot. We want to try growing it. Do you guys think you could do something with it? And so it's driving each other into places we never really thought. Right now we work with about 20 farms. There is a balance to that. We would love to work with everybody in France, but realistically we're only one bar with one outlet. But hopefully going forward, the idea is that we'll build up a lot of these different partnerships and we'll start building in more and more and more products. Which comes to where we have to put it. So like I was saying when we talk about fundamentally changing, the space that Little Red Door is, if you haven't been, is in a place called the Marais, which roughly translates as the swamp. It's a very, very condensed part of Paris. It's a very old area. And the buildings there aren't, they're not in the best shape. Everything's made from limestone, which when you're in a swamp is really troubling. So the space we have is very functional, but it is not designed to deal with this. And we found that out pretty quickly when 200 kilograms of cherry tomatoes arrived. And we had to figure out what we were going to do with them, how we were going to store all of it once we made our tomato eau de vie. And that quickly led us to realize, well, we don't need to be here. The part of Little Red Door that needs to be where it is the bar. Everything else doesn't need to necessarily be here. And so then we started looking at, well, what if we had a separate space that acted as the I don't really know a good word other than larder. I don't know if that translates very well, but basically just a store, something that's part lab, so it's where all our equipment is, it's where we can work, but also eventually was becoming more and more of a warehouse. And the long-term game is to basically create where, if you imagine stocking the bar, having more options in the larder than we actually have in the bar, so that things come and roll through and we're able to lay things down for longer. I mean, we really love our tomato eau de vie, but we're really hoping that next time we make a distillate, we want to start aging things ourselves in this space. We want to start being more and more ambitious, because and when we're talking about the business side of it and taking this extra margin and investing it back in, we're giving ourselves the capacity to be more ambitious with the products we're making and the people we're working with, because we're creating the capacity for that in creating this extra space, in creating this wider network. And for example, with the distillate, the neutral grain that we get, we started working with an Alsatian distiller to do that, and the opportunities of working in that very unique way with them in which we're developing it has also brought up the ability to distill on site. So we're looking at the ability to actually, I'm not sure in Germany, in France it's quite a common thing where in regions like Armagnac and Calvados people come around with a still and distill on the farm. By working with the Alsatian distiller, we're starting to open up that opportunity to do that. And so we're hoping eventually that next year at some point we'll be able to go to some of these farms, and instead of buying cherry tomatoes and bring them into the lab and converting all of it, we can just bring everything to these farms and convert it there on the day. And there's also an inherent value in that, because that's a cool thing to see, right? Seeing a farm with a distiller, and so we're creating events around that, hopefully, to bring more people into this process, to bring people into this experience and really tell this story further and bring to life the idea of, when we say farm to glass, literally showing you stuff come out of the ground, go through a still and end up in your glass in very real time. And so like I said, we're learning as we go, but it's all about creating the platform and using this business model to drive all of that, basically. The other side is staffing. Because you need many people, and you need very good people to do this, and you need people who buy into it. So a big thing that we've worked on, and we're still working on, is finding the best way to do all of this, and the staff that we have kind of fall into that. And so we're working, there's a natural synchronicity to it that we didn't really think about, but if you think about the way that most farms work, they're very, very busy in the summer, very, very quiet in the winter. And Little Red Door, very, very busy in the winter and very quiet in the summer. And so you have natural kind of excesses that for some reason, really nicely overlap. And so we were looking at basically creating a schedule for our staff that basically use between, say, September to March is very much in Little Red Door focus because we're super, super busy. And then between March and September, when we would normally then have, for example, more people on holiday and traveling a lot more and all those kind of things, we're now looking at staff going out in the summer and being part of those farming projects. So, for example, in Thunderperch, the place we said before, they have a guest house that they use to basically have interns come for a year at a time. The idea is for our staff to be able to go out and do part of that experience and feed back in. And like I said, move beyond the transactional nature of supplier and bar, and become much closer partners, literally working in each other's place. If you go into Little Red Door right now, around the room is the portraits of the different producers that we use. Trying to bring this to life. Unfortunately, because we're a bar and not a restaurant, we don't have that ability to literally put the produce right in front of you in the way that kind of farm-to-table dining normally is quite literal. And that's quite great for guests, but for us, we had to be creative around that. And so finding ways to bring that to life has been part of this challenge. And also, the other side of that is, I don't know many bartenders who know how to process most of that. I mean, most of us had to learn it as we go. Our staff now are learning how to do a lot of this. And so we're now looking at the point where we're looking at hiring people who have a more varied background, people who aren't bartenders, but are people who have worked with farming backgrounds, who have worked in production backgrounds, who have worked in logistics backgrounds. Because moving all of this stuff around is really complicated, and probably most of my time is just following deliveries around France and Paris. That's also because France and Paris are awful at deliveries. But working with farms is not as straightforward as you think. And so now we're looking at hopefully bringing in these people into our business that are, again, it's using that as an ability, because once we have that capacity as a business to do all of these things, there's so much more you can do with that. When you have people in your business that then have that experience, you have, luckily for us, the platform of Little Red Door to put that in front of guests. The opportunities are basically as however much time we give ourselves, and that's all of this. That's pretty much it. Does anyone have any questions or anything about it? Anything? Sorry.
No, go ahead.
Yeah.
You talked about turning things into shelf stable.
Yes.
Was that just for your guys' own use, or is there any interest in expanding that further?
100%. That's part of the intentions. Originally, we focused on shelf stable because it was during COVID, and we were worried if we create a load of fresh prep for a menu, especially if you're creating on a scale like 15,000 serves, if we get closed again because COVID comes back, what are we going to do? So the intention was for that, and then the intention was, instead of France and Paris didn't really, because of the cultural drinking, the drinking culture there, they weren't that interested in bottled cocktails. It didn't really resonate, it doesn't really fit into the way that they socialize specifically. So the idea was to create products that people who wanted to make cocktails could take home. And so the idea was that with these things, I mean, for example, creme de la creme, we get asked about it so much that there is then the opportunity going forward to be able to have that exist outside of Little Red Door. In one way or another, whether it's us selling it directly, whether we partner with someone to produce it on a larger scale. But that's kind of the next step, and that's what I'm talking about with the distillery as well, is that then also requires a massive capacity of health and safety rules, for example, for reading all the regulations in the EU. They then help inform us on what we can do with that. There's also just the practical side of it, is how we can have all of these flavors all year round. If we work with just fresh juices and infusions and things like that, it's not possible then to have raspberry outside of raspberry season, and that's something we really worked on, is creating. We didn't want everything to just be a distillate of, we wanted to have more variety from that, and so we also then started learning from French agriculture and drinking traditions of making wines, mistels, eau de vies, liqueurs. I mean, we're super privileged to be in France that has such an amazing diversity of spirits and distilling culture, and I mean, all liqueurs in the world, most of it comes from France, right? They have a real expertise on this, and so It's then learning from those guys and how we can then bring that into the modern world, thinking about it as though like traditional French cooking is like the benchmark of like all chefs have to learn that, right? Every five-star hotel, every Michelin you go to, most of the chefs have done some kind of French training, but where they go from that kind of then creates that, and that's our view of liqueurs and spirits. We want to take the amazing things that the Calvados producers we work locally with, directly with, tell us about working with apples and working with fresh fruit. The liqueur makers, Gabriel Boudier, who are here with Ashley Ora, they're like some of the smartest flavor experts in the world professionally. Like that's their job, is to be really good with flavor and really good at extracting, and that informs us in how we work. Yes?
Yeah, so how are you taking care with legal issues with producing the alcohol?
So we don't ferment anything at all because of that. Because we don't produce alcohol. We buy alcohol that's rectified in, and we never create alcohol. And in that way, we don't really fall into any grey areas of it. It's something we're looking at, especially brewing, to make our own beers, our own ciders and perries and things like that. It's something we would love to do, and wine as well, obviously being in France. But that would be another hurdle, and that's where we then need to be informed by a lot of these partners. And to do that, we have to create the capacity to it. So the idea is to get this menu up and running in the larder, start filling that in with it, and then tackle that next step of customs and duty and all of that kind of stuff.
Bit of a long question, but
Cool.
are there many other bars in Paris or France, first of all, that are looking at a similar approach? And is it something that you would want to look to educate others within the industry and your community about as well? Because I guess you're making such an environmental impact as well in the industry. Is it something that you kind of want to do within Red Door or live Red Door, or is it something that you want to hopefully seed out to others in the community in France?
I would say that we don't know of many other places in France that are working like this, partly because, I mean, other than ourselves, the Syndicat and Candelaria, there aren't that many well-known, right, nationally bars, so people don't engage with it in the same way. And because of that, people generally focus on dining, and so you do see a lot of it in dining, and this is something we're trying to kind of make the connection with for a lot of our guests and a lot of people in our industry around us, that there is no reason why we can't work like that. I mean, for example, in Paris alone, you have our veg, like you have a place that has the credentials to say we can do this as best as anyone else in the world, but we can also challenge our guests. It's a big thing in France that people don't want to. So we would love for more people to do it, and we're trying to actually. One of the amazing things as well with the farms we work with, for example, the urban farm we work with down in the south of Paris, we're trying to get them in contact with more bars in Paris to help them as well, because we like to think that we do what we do really well and people come because of that, and so it doesn't really hurt us to then bring and support the rest of the industry around us and help introduce them. And we would love to kind of help educate more people on it, but I would also caveat that with there are so many people in France who are like so progressive in permaculture and urban farming, in just general the agricultural history of it, that we are very much just learning from all these people. Every time we work with a new producer, they introduce us to new ideas. It's something we focus a lot about in the menu. There's a huge variety of different producers, from urban farms, permaculture, protected AOPs at 200, 300 years old, really progressive bioconservatives like the citrus farm. And none of them work in the same way. And if you ask one of them, I don't think any of them are certified bio, and if you ask them about bio, they'll give you like a 2-hour rant about why they hate it and blah, blah, blah. But each one isn't a criticism of the other. They're all ultimately aiming at helping preserve biodiversity, preserve agricultural traditions, and hopefully work towards a better environment. And so we're looking to support as many of those, and so we're trying to learn from them. So I think it'd be very difficult for us to really try and educate anybody more than how we work as a business, because we're learning so much. But that being said, one of our eventual aims is to hopefully bring people with a farming background into the business who can then help us inform us on that in the same way You see with someone like Noma, with their separate entity of R&D, you have to bring the people in who know what they're talking about to really push that, and so that's something we're looking at further down the line. Anyone else have any questions?
Yes, I have a question regarding sustainability that was mentioned earlier. Were you able to quantify the impact you had on perhaps CO2 emission or that kind of stuff with that kind of work you're making?
So yes, we have the information to do that. It's a large part of the way we're trying to work is be able to get that information, because it's one of our biggest issues with working with brands, and even though there are so many amazing brands out there who could tell us a lot of information, they would never really reveal that to us. One of the aims with this is to be more transparent, and we're also quite demanding with the brands we work with on that. So the menu, no one is paid to be listed in the menu because it's all built on these kind of relationships. We haven't managed to quantify it yet, but we started working with a sustainable packaging company who part of their business is doing that analysis for a brand or a company. And so our long-term ambition is once we sort the rest of the program out, then we will be able to have a number for that about how much we were doing before, because we have a rough idea of the data before, but not after. So it's still in progress, but that's a long-term ambition. All good? Cool. Thank you so much, guys. It was a real pleasure.